Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we will be recapping an amazing manhwa story called Into the Light once again. Please don't forget to subscribe and like this video, as it helps to improve the channel and its content. Thank you, and now let's begin. Have you guys seen a cute and beautiful girl with snowy hair and a bright smile? Everyone calls her the Flower of Edenvale and the Light of Edenvale. These beautiful and amazing nicknames belong to my little sister, the fifth princess, Marianne. Everyone in the mansion and even the nobles loves her. Not a single person can look away from her smile, and people pay attention to her every word. I can't even imagine the feeling of hearing this little girl's voice and how beautiful it must be. It's not just her voice. With the greatest golden eyes in the empire, a lovable appearance, and a warm personality, she is a child loved by everyone. Now, that was just a beautiful side of one character. Sadly, there's another girl with crow-like black hair and muddy green eyes, and she was an entirely different person. Despite this, she loved and cherished her little sister. The fact that they were family remained unchanged. Despite also being a princess, she was always subjected to mockery. Nobles and even the maids working in their home would whisper and call her the dirty crown. But no matter how often people whispered and compared her to her little sister Marianne, she tried her best to love her sister. Now, Marianne is worried about her sister, her face sad. These two lovable sisters have a good relationship despite the insults. The older sister just ignores them and shows love to her little sister Marianne. But that is until she was framed for poisoning her little sister. This news spread throughout the entire mansion and reached the ears of some nobles. They started spreading many bad things about Princess Elisa, believing she acted out of jealousy towards Princess Marianne. They even labeled Elisa as a disgrace to the empire. The chaos continued as days passed. Now our poor Elisa is in a cell, where her entire life has changed. She was imprisoned and wondered how long she had been asleep, unable to tell the passage of time in the dungeon. The place where she was held captive was a solitary cell in the underground prison, devoid of light. The single loaf of bread and cup of water she received once a day were the only stimulation she had in that thick darkness. Elisa lived on the cold floor of the prison, and mealtime was the only thing she looked forward to. One day, after receiving no news from her family, she came to a realization. What if she ended up imprisoned there for the rest of her life? Elisa tried her best to console herself by believing that someone would prove her innocence one day. Now, Elisa was ready for change, her only wish being to leave this cold and dark place and ensure Marianne's safety. Suddenly, the door opened, and two guards stood in the light outside. She was dragged out, and while walking through the garden, she was reminded of memories and felt the warmth and beauty of the sunlight. However, the guards noticed her reaction and angrily pushed her inside a room, slamming her to the ground. Looking up, Elisa noticed familiar faces and felt happy because they were her family, whom she had long wished to see. But she noticed someone missing, Marianne, her beloved little sister. Suddenly, Marianne appeared behind the emperor's throne. Seeing Marianne in good health, Elisa felt happy and thankful to God. But her brief happiness turned to despair as the emperor made his judgment. For the crime of attempting to murder the fifth princess Marianne, the fourth princess Elisa shall be executed. The most shocking part of this moment is the face of Marianne, the fifth princess. She is now smiling like a devil. Look at the face of this little girl. This part of the story is wow, really wow. The first and second princes, Las and Elsis Delidenal, clearly have no sympathy for their younger sister, the third princess Adelina. She looks genuinely happy to hear the news, while little Prince Lelis is putting on a brave face. Emperor Ulus D. Edenal asks his daughter if she pleads guilty to her crime. He is thoroughly convinced that she is the one behind the poisoning and even says it's disgusting that she continues to feign innocence. What kind of father is this? Holding back tears, Elisa struggles to answer. Her sister Adelina steps forward and demands she answer the emperor, glaring fiercely at her. Is there not one person in this family who cares for her? Even baby Lelis is being harsh. Part of the reason for their unwavering cruelty is that they have a supposed witness to the crime. Next walks in a maid named Rebecca, one of the women who works in Alyssa's palace. She was there on the day they had tea and claims to have seen Alyssa pouring a mysterious white powder into Marianne's cup. Obviously, that's not true, but whoever is framing her has done a darn good job. They've planted the same powder in her bedroom closet. Alyssa begins to weep, swearing on her life that she never once tried to harm her sister. She turns to her eldest brother, Crown Prince Laius, looking for sympathy, but instead, she gets a slap. He tells their father not to wait a moment longer and even suggests burning her eyes out before they behead her. What kind of sick little psycho? I can't believe these people. Her father orders the guards to give her nothing but filthy water as they drag her away, setting the date of her execution for 4 days' time. When the day finally arrives, she isn't totally sane anymore. I mean, can you blame her? Her entire family turned on her and never even let her defend herself. As if that wasn't bad enough, they actually took Laius's suggestion of burning her eyes literally and figuratively. Blinded by the pain, Alyssa begged Selena, the goddess of the moon and revenge, to give her a chance to get revenge or at least prove her innocence. And if that's not possible, she never wants to be reborn as a human again. Now, I don't know about you, but somehow I don't think that's going to happen. But Alyssa doesn't seem to get the hint. When she opens her eyes, reborn as a precious baby girl with silver hair and ocean blue eyes, she thinks Selena has abandoned her. At least this life is starting off better than her last one. She's already adored by her maids and family alike. And yes, you guessed it, she's a princess again. This time, she was born as Aisha, the first princess of the Elmer Empire, the Ademble's greatest rivals. The crown prince, little Prince Isis, is already obsessed with her. And who wouldn't be? Her jewel-like eyes and soft silver hair have already earned her the nickname Elmer's one and only star. At this rate, she'll be rivaling Marianne in no time. Prince Isis tries to make friends with his sister, but that's not an easy task with a 10-month-old baby. Aisha is hesitant to connect with him at first, but she listens intently once he begins to tell her the story of her birth. He always wanted a little sister, but his mother was frail, making it impossible for her to have another child. 2 years ago, she passed away and was replaced by Empress Iris, who gave birth to Aisha. Instead of being jealous and resentful of these new additions, Isis is grateful to have a family again. What a sweet kid. The Empress herself then arrives, delighted to see her stepson and daughter getting along so well. The Emperor, Tyren de Elmer, is right behind her. Tyren was originally a war hero known for having subdued the neighboring nations and creating a route known as the Path of Glory, which links all of the Elmer Empire. Nowadays, he is known for his outstanding diplomacy skills and wise decision-making. When Aisha was born, he gave out gold coins and bread to those who were starving, gave pardons to prisoners, and gave thanks to God himself. Who is this guy? He seems like some kind of saint. Aisha couldn't have found a more perfect family for her fresh start at life. But the more love she receives, the more she is haunted by memories of her past. While trapped in her cell as Alyssa, she was once visited by Marianne. Instead of pitying her, she just laughed and said she wanted to see how pathetic Alyssa looked before being sentenced to death. Wow, does she even have a soul? Her eyes turned red in the shadows as she taunted her sister and promised to meet her on the execution ground. To give you guys a little more context, Marianne was born to a common woman but accepted into the royal family because of her golden eyes. Alyssa was born from the same mother as the crown prince. But even that didn't stop him from turning on her and ordering her eyes to be burnt out. That's why it's so hard for Aisha to stomach the love and affection little Isis is giving her now. She swears never to believe him and never to love him. That way she can never be betrayed again. Isn't that sad? It also sounds kind of impossible given just how much affection the prince is showering her with. A few months later, Aisha has hit her first birthday. She's still well loved, though by now there are rumors floating around that there's something wrong with her, probably on account of her reserved attitude. She still hasn't spoken yet and rarely expresses her emotions, which is unusual for a child of her age. Of course, she could speak if she really wanted to. She's just too scared to try. In moments like these, she is comforted by special orbs of light which have been by her side since birth. No one but Aisha can see them, proving her status as a special enchantress, one who can see the entities that exist in the natural world. She is able to converse with these spirits who comfort her even when the servants are filled with doubts. Her mother also believes in her and frequently reassures the princess that she can take as much time as she needs. While the maids are discussing her upcoming birthday, the emperor visits to see his wife and daughter, who he affectionately pats on the head. Empress Iris offers to let him hold her, but the emperor doesn't seem to know how to hold a baby. It's also possible that he's just overwhelmed by her cuteness. I think that's more likely. Iris reassures Tyren that his daughter is perfectly healthy, encouraging him to take her in his arms. While cradling her, the emperor decides to hold a banquet in honor of her birthday for 1 whole month. He's so obsessed with his daughter that he would throw a party for a whole month. Is that even possible? But the emperor is 100% serious. He thinks it's a perfectly reasonable occasion and wants to spare no expense. Aisha is a little stressed at the idea of being on show for an entire month, but her mother seems to have given in already. You see, when the empress first joined the palace, things were quite difficult for her. The last empress, thus Prince Isis's mother, was well liked and many of her people were still spread across the palace. Unlike Iris, she was not a princess but the daughter of a Maris, so she feared for the safety of her children who might be considered second to those of holy royal blood. So when the emperor showered his affection for her daughter in such a grand way, her heart was put at ease. Iris is the daughter of the Russell family, a Maris bloodline who guard the northern border. They rarely come to the capital, so a month-long banquet is a good excuse to invite them down to stay. It's a double win for the empress, just not for her daughter. The contrast to her old life is painfully obvious. Alyssa's mother didn't care for her, and the emperor only cared about Crown Prince Laos. Oh, and evil Maren, of course. Aisha falls asleep in her mother's arms and wakes up alone in her bedroom at night. I'm not sure what kind of people let a baby sleep all alone in a big bed like that, but apparently that's just the way this palace runs. Once again, Aisha is visited by her spirit friends. All of a sudden, they start to glitter at her window. The next moment, they transform into a man with blonde hair and golden eyes, surrounded by the orbs of light. Aisha is terrified, as you would be if a random adult man appeared in your bedroom at night. But he doesn't make any sound and quietly walks toward her, communicating only through his willpower, which is kind of like telepathy. The orbs morph into tiny little fairies who say, "I see the king." It sounds like some kind of prophecy, but Aisha is still too scared to respond. Seeing that she won't respond, the strange man decides he's come too early and presses a finger against her head, erasing all memory of their interaction and sending her straight to sleep. Wait, but who was he? Is this like the Manhwa version of Men in Black? I guess we'll never know because when her maid comes to wake her the next morning, Aisha doesn't remember a thing except the moon. She goes on with her daily life as usual and spends most of her time learning how to walk with the Empress. She's too nervous to try other things, but with this, Aisha tries her very best. Maybe because each step feels like a step closer to freedom. But with her tiny little body, she can only stay upright for so long, and every time she sees the Empress cheering her on, it brings back memories of the past again. Alyssa's mother, Empress Eden Bell, never looked at her with half the love that Iris does now. She only held her to put on a good show in front of the nobles. But even though it was fake, Alyssa always enjoyed the warmth of her mother's arms. Shaking off her memories, Aisha attempts to take another step, with her mother and maids cheering her on. Even a little tumble isn't enough to shake her determination. In a moment, she is back on her feet, doing her best to stay stable as she toddles toward her mother. Ah, she's so cute when she's determined. A few days later, Iris's parents, the Maris and Marquis Russell, arrive for the birthday bonanza, excited to see their granddaughter for the first time. They're very affectionate, just like their daughter, who is overwhelmed with joy to be reunited with her parents. She asks about their territory in the north and how relations have been with Eden Bell. Wait, Eden Bell, as in Alyssa's family from the Adenal Empire? They head inside, where Maris explains that things have been quiet since the peace agreement. Clearly, there has been some tension between the two families in the past. They are a little suspicious because there's a rumor going around that the Eden Bell family will send an envoy and a gift to Aisha's birthday banquet. Aisha is immediately terrified that someone from the royal family will show up. She starts to cry, causing concern among her relatives, who joke that she hates the Eden Bells just as much as the rest of them. They don't realize just how right they are. Her mother takes her for a little walk through the corridors, trying to calm her down. The tension eases when the emperor and prince arrive, eager to see their favorite ladies and share a cup of tea. Isis plays with Aisha, promising to always protect her like a big brother should. He lifts her up and whispers that he's preparing a special birthday present for her. Aisha can't help it. She's finally starting to get a little excited about her big day, and so is the rest of the empire. The nobles are all keen to meet the girl whom the emperor loves enough to throw a month-long celebration for. On the day the banquet begins, the empress and princess are dressed in two gorgeous matching dusky rose ball gowns. Even Isis is all dressed up in his fancy little uniform, begging to carry his sister into the banquet hall himself. The nobles are already gathered inside, waiting for the guests of honor to arrive. Aisha is really nervous, but at least with her brother and mother by her side, she won't ever be alone. The emperor joins them on a balcony overlooking the hall, welcoming the nobility of the Elmer Empire. He invites everyone to celebrate his daughter and enjoy the month-long party while they cheer and applaud down below. After the welcome speech is over, the imperial family descends into the crowds, where everyone immediately starts gushing over Aisha's adorable, angelic appearance. Reluctantly, Isis hands her over to the emperor, who has apparently gotten over his fear of holding babies now that the whole empire is watching them. The rest of the party runs smoothly after that. Aisha is baptized with holy water from the god of light, and then the nobles line up to offer gifts to the princess. That's when the envoy from Eden Bell arrives. At first, Aisha spots the blue eyes and thinks it's the crown prince, her brother Los. But when the guest lowers his hood, he reveals himself as Arison, the son of a duke who is talented in magical arts. He seems fascinated by her bright blue eyes, which are the mark of a witch in the Eden Bell Empire. Arison was Aisha's best and probably her only friend in her past life, so seeing him now is both heartwarming and heartbreaking. They were only 3 years apart, but it seems like he's become much more powerful now, since he's representing the Eden Bell family abroad. He kneels down to present a magical stone with special magic designed to protect the wearer. After Arison, the last to present their gift is Prince Isis. But he doesn't have any old jewel or flower to give her. No, he wants to swear his oath as a knight and dedicate his life to protecting Aisha. He really just raised the bar for brothers everywhere. Aisha is shocked and doesn't want him to lay his life down for her sake, even hypothetically. She starts to cry, but Isis rushes to assure her that he knows what he's doing. With or without an oath, he's already promised to protect her his whole life anyhow, so what's the difference in making it official? Aisha still thinks he's being stupid, but she can't deny how much it warms her heart. She doesn't protest as her father knights his son, allowing him to swear on his sister's behalf. The nobles are delighted. Now her official knight, Isis takes her to a good spot to watch the fireworks, which are utterly magical. She finally feels at peace with him and is starting to become more optimistic about this new life. So she decides to speak his name so quietly that she doesn't think he heard it at first. But that boy doesn't miss a thing. Once he realizes she just said her first word and it was his name, he starts to cry. Oh my gosh, they're just too precious. She was kind of hoping he wouldn't notice, but now he's begging her to say it again. Hearing the commotion, the emperor and empress come running, worried that something bad has happened. But Aisha has finally decided to open her heart to this new world, so she confidently calls each of them by name, making everyone cry. She doesn't know it, but Arison is watching from below. Strangely, he's reminded of the Eden Bell imperial family, who seem to be getting on just fine without Alyssa. The only one who misses her is Arison. When his master arrives, he admits that he doesn't understand why she had to die. He was studying in the wizard's tower at the time, so by the time he found out, it was already too late. Even now, he still sees her from time to time when he wakes up with tears streaming down his face. He swears never to forgive the Eden Bell family and vows to investigate the truth surrounding Alyssa's accusation. Surprisingly, his sullen old master agrees to help, only on the condition that Arison massages his shoulders from time to time. Sounds like a fair trade if you ask me. Now we fast forward to 6 years in the future. Aisha is now a cheerful little 7-year-old who seems much more comfortable with her new life. Isis is older too, but no less fond of his baby sister than when she was little. While she's reading in the gardens, he comes to sit beside her, impressed that she's already studying such advanced subjects at her age. Well, that's what happens when you've lived 2 lives. I guess you get reborn as a genius. She started demonstrating her talents from the age of 3. When she finally relaxed into her new family, she started learning to read at the age of 3, impressing everyone with her memory and writing skills. The Elmer language is different from the one spoken in the Adenal Empire, but she got the hang of it pretty quickly. Soon she graduated to ancient letters, hoping to read old texts about spirits in the Imperial Library. You have to give it to her. This girl is one smart cookie. I know if I was reborn, I sure as heck would not be using my second life to study. Despite her success and how people keep praising her as a genius, Isis has never considered her a competitor to his position as heir, which is good since Aisha has no desire to take over the throne. All she wants is revenge on the Eden Bell Empire. That's why she's trying to get information on spirits, hoping to use her natural-born talents to her advantage somehow. And if you are wondering how the Eden Bell family is doing, unfortunately, things are going well. Marianne has been honored as a saint, though I can't imagine why, and Los is going to have his enthronement ceremony as crown prince this year. More than anything, Aisha is curious about Marianne's blood-red eyes. She only saw them twice in the days before her death, but they were creepy enough to stick with her. There's definitely some twisted meaning behind them. Back in the present, Isis is commenting that he often feels she's older than him because of how smart she is. Aisha reminds him that he's also a genius. Even at his age, he's already one of the most talented knights in the empire. Just as they're about to head back to the palace, Isis tells her she can always lean on him when things get tough. He's such a cutie, literally the definition of a golden retriever. When Aisha returns to the palace, she's informed that the Empress is looking for her. You see, things are very busy in the palace at the moment. The Elmer Empire has a festival that corresponds with every season. The springtime festival is about showing gratitude to the gods, so all the palace staff and the Empress herself are busy preparing for the ceremony. Fortunately, Iris is a good mother and always makes time for her daughter when she can. They haven't seen each other in 4 days, so Aisha is full of questions about the ceremony and how she's been. After their chit-chat, Iris brings up a scholar by the name of Alman, an academic professor in charge of her studies. Aisha suddenly panics, wondering if she's about to get scolded, but her mother only has positive things to say, reporting that the scholar was incredibly impressed with her academic abilities. Iris confesses that she hasn't been worried about her daughter before, but now that an official professor has confirmed she's basically a genius, the Empress is concerned about Aisha's career path. I mean, they can't just let her sit around the palace all her life. Her mother gives her a chance to think it over slowly and promises to make any opportunity available if she wants it. In the meantime, the spring ceremony will be a good chance for her to make some friends of her own age, something the princess is severely lacking. Aisha makes a good point that her father and brother are too protective to let her go out and make friends, but the Empress promises to convince them. As she should, every princess needs a couple of besties. After finishing her elementary book on ancient languages, Aisha's back to the library for something a little more challenging. There's not time to read everything, so she's hoping she can use her very basic understanding to read an ancient book on spirits and fast-forward her research. Luckily, she just so happens to find exactly the book she's looking for. She's about to go home and start reading when the spirits point her to another book, one about magic. Aisha's not about to ignore a direct request from the ancient spirit, so she takes that one with her too. On her way out, she runs into Isis in the hallway, quickly hiding the book she borrowed. Or at least she tries to. Isis catches sight of the book, so she hurriedly explains that it's another book on ancient languages. She tries to run away before he can ask any more questions, but her brother isn't interested in snooping. He just wants to praise her for how hard she's been working in class. Looks like someone else heard the news of that scholar calling her a genius. He also mentions her future but reassures his baby sister that there's no pressure. The family will support her no matter what she chooses to do. Isn't this all a little too much pressure to be putting on a 7-year-old? Like, I know she's smart, but damn. Finally alone in her bedroom, Aisha has the chance to pore through the ancient book and learn some fascinating facts about the history of the spirits. Although she can't read super well in the ancient language, she's still able to pick up a rough idea of what happened. The only issue is it doesn't say anything about people who can see spirits from birth, but it does have information on how to summon spirits. In order to summon, a user needs both mana and a spirit. They can form a summoning contract which will bind a spirit to their will. Unfortunately, it doesn't have any information on how to actually do that. Ancient books are always so vague. Intrigued by the other book the spirits pointed her towards, Aisha picks up the magic book and, what do you know, literally the first page she turns to has the instructions for low-level spirit contracting. With these two texts combined, Aisha has enough information to try and make her own contract. She sketches out a basic rune on paper and places her hand on top, reciting a special incantation. Obviously, because she's a child prodigy and a reborn princess, it works on her first try. The paper starts to glow, and from within the rune appears a tiny golden fairy. This fairy isn't just any spirit. Aisha recognizes her voice at once and realizes this is the same spirit who has been by her side since she was little. To form the contract, the fairy gently kisses Aisha's forehead and suddenly bursts into her physical form. She introduces herself as Lu, a low-level light spirit. Isn't she just the cutest? Lu explains that when contracted, spirits are given an entity which resides in the human world. That's why she now has a body and why they can speak more freely. Lu congratulates Aisha on a successful summoning. It's not that easy for most people, but since Aisha is super talented, she did it in one go. Lu addresses her as Master, delighted to finally be summoned and connected with the girl she's been protecting all these years. Apparently, Aisha is pretty famous among the spirits. Even the Spirit King knows about her. Lu accidentally lets it slip that Aisha is the only one in the world who can see spirits without making a contract. Aisha knew she was special, but she didn't think she was totally unique. Maybe her power is much greater than she realized. Eager to test her talents, Aisha asks about the higher-level spirits. Apparently, summoning more powerful spirits all comes down to how much magic the summoner possesses. While Aisha has a high ability to adapt and connect with spirits, she doesn't have much magical power at the moment. She's still just a kid, after all. Lu gets excited when she notices cookies on the desk, so they sit down for a cup of tea while Aisha processes all of this. She asks Lu how to acquire more magical power, but it's not some skill with a special cheat code. She'll have to increase it little by little if she wants to get to the higher level spirits and ultimately the Spirit King of Light, Luminous. Luminous is also what the humans call the God of Light, associated with glory, victory, and good harvests. It turns out they're the same entity in this universe. The Spirit Kings were born after the Creator God made day and night. Their names changed over time, so these days they're not always recognized by their original identities. Some of the deities humans worship are actually gods, but some, like Luminous, are really spirits. Thanks to Lu's little history lesson, Aisha has figured out a way to help her mother. The next day, she heads over to visit the Empress and Emperor, excited to announce her plan for the upcoming festivities. Since the Spring Festival is all about honoring spirits and the God of Light, she proposes her own plan for the celebrations. Every day, she's been working hard, hoping to bring the spirits back to the center of the Elmer Empire, since they've been mostly forgotten in recent years. As soon as Aisha asks Lu about the Spirit King, Lu starts rambling about how cool and handsome he is. Sounds like someone has a little crush if you ask me. He has yellow eyes and silver hair and is supposed to be the most dazzling of all gods and Spirit Kings alike. It's not possible for a human to summon him because no human has ever had enough magic to bring him into the human realm. But theoretically, it is still possible since fairies are forced to accept any contract that summons them. Aisha is already crazy talented for her age, so who knows, maybe someday she might have enough power to summon Luminous. She suddenly gets curious about her brother, who has been sick for a couple of days after practicing his swordsmanship in the rain. The maid wasn't actually supposed to tell her. Isis ordered his condition to be kept a secret in case Aisha came to visit and got infected. Understandably, the princess is a little upset that he kept it from her. But she decides to obey his wishes and write a letter instead. Aisha doesn't know it, but he could really use a pick-me-up right now. He's being looked after by the crabbiest of all the knights in training, a red-headed boy named Balmor. Bion is the son of a duke, which maybe explains why he's not afraid to be rude to the crown prince. If Isis is a golden retriever, Bion is like the reluctant wolf at his side, always criticizing his reckless choices, like training in the rain, for example. A butler interrupts their bickering to announce that a maid has arrived from the princess's palace. Oh, secret's out, buddy. A flustered Isis hurriedly gets out of bed to receive his sister's precious letter. As you probably guessed, he forgets all about his illness once he's opened it. Bion tells him not to be dramatic, but come on, this is Crown Prince Isis. He's literally the drama king. He sends the maid back and tells Bion to can it while he reads Aisha's warm wishes. She talks about how much she misses him and how she hopes he'll be healthy in time for the spring ceremony, promising to pray for him. What a sweetie. Obviously, if Aisha requests it, her brother will move heaven and earth to make it happen. Just like she suspected, he does know she's hiding something from her family, but he trusts that she has her own reasons. He just wants to support her no matter what. Bion watches in shock as the prince suddenly regains his energy to write a response for Aisha. Although he thinks Isis is a little overeager at times, he is happy that the princess is becoming such a positive influence in his life. After thus passed away, there was a time when Isis went a little crazy and didn't have any direction in his life. Now, with Empress Iris and Aisha, he seems more driven than ever before. I mean, he literally swore his life to her. You can't get more dedicated than that. The first day of spring arrives at last, and with it comes the first day of the festival. There's an initial ceremony for Luminous, the god of light, after which the priests channel his holy powers to heal the sick and wounded. While watching the ceremony, Lu explains that the priests aren't channeling a divine energy from God as the humans believe. It's more like a special power owned by the light spirits, which can heal sickness and injuries. The priests of Luminous are given access to a small amount of his power as thanks for their dedication. Aisha can use it too, but luckily for her, she doesn't have to dedicate her whole life to the church to access it. The higher the spirit summoned, the more power she can use. Even a low-level spirit like Lu can provide enough for her to heal people just like those priests. Aisha is smart enough to know that she should hide this skill for now. If word gets out that Elmer's princess is a spirit controller who can heal the wounded, she might become a target. After the ceremony, the imperial family hosts a garden party with Elmer's greatest nobles. It's a great chance for Aisha to make friends, but all she wants to do is talk with Isis. She hasn't seen him since he recovered, and ever since then, he's been tailed by that red-haired boy, Duke Bion's son. He already has a reputation for being talented in both swords and magic. Just when Aisha's head is starting to pound from all the boring girly conversation, Bion approaches her table. Apparently, Isis is looking for her. The perfect excuse to break away from this dull tea party. Once they're alone, Bion confesses that Isis didn't actually summon her. He just wanted a chance to talk to her alone. Even from a distance, he could see that she wasn't having a good time, so he decided to come and rescue her. Ooh, he's observant and kind. I always love a kind-hearted king with a cold exterior. Aisha thanks him and notices the floral brooch on his jacket. It was her idea. Everyone in the festival is wearing flowers as a token of thanks to the spirits for their protection. Bion compliments her planning. He's noticed that every event today is clearly geared around reminding people of the spirit's existence, since they're normally easy to forget. He sure catches on quick. He also compliments her maturity. He has been meaning to talk to her for a while, but the princess is kind of hard to approach for one very obvious reason. That reason barges in a moment later, completely ignoring Bion as he gushes over her letter and how much he missed her. He only stops rambling when they notice their grandparents' arrival from across the garden. Bion quietly tags along behind the kids as they guide the Maris and Marquest through the palace grounds. The Maris stops them by a flower arch and asks his granddaughter to stand beneath it. Aisha gets so caught up in the beauty of the roses that she doesn't notice him pulling out a glowing orb. It's kind of like a magical camera used to record pictures, images, and sounds. Just now, he took a photo of her, capturing every frame in the magic ball. Aisha's face goes bright red when she sees herself twirling and smiling at the petals. Isis immediately asks if he can keep it. His grandfather says no, pointing out that he can see his sister every day if he wants to, and besides, he bought this one as a present for Aisha. Bion watches him fondly. He doesn't have any siblings, so he doesn't know what it's like to bicker over something or miss someone the way Isis does. It makes him kind of jealous. The next day is the biggest event of the entire festival. The burning of incense to pray for peace in the empire. Everyone wears white, and Isis will lead the prayer as successor to the Elmer throne. In the evening, they'll have the largest banquet of the entire year, so there's a lot going on. Before all the madness starts, Aisha, Isis, and Bion get a chance to sit down for tea in the garden. Everything is perfectly presented, but Aisha doesn't recognize the person serving them, which is weird because usually serving tea is an honor reserved only for those who have worked in the palace for a really long time. The color of the tea is also a little strange. Oh, I think we all know what's happening here. Aisha doesn't think anything of it and takes a sip. Lu appears to warn her, but it's already too late. She starts to spit blood, her vision blurring, but she's not worried for herself. Instead, she looks to Isis, praying he hasn't drunk too much. A sudden splatter of blood confirms her suspicions. Both prince and princess collapse at the table, still reaching for each other. Oh my gosh, this is crazy. 5 minutes ago, everything was fine, and now they can't be dead. There's no way they'd kill off the protagonist and her loyal puppy. Right after the incident, the nobles are in a frenzy. Thanks to Bion, they quickly caught the servant responsible. But the poor kid is furious at himself for not being able to save them. He needs to give himself a break. He's a soldier, not a doctor. Luckily, Empress Iris was nearby, so she rushed to their side in time to call for help. After a full medical assessment, the doctor confirms that Aisha only ingested a small amount of poison. It had a serious impact since she's so young, but she should recover just fine. Isis, on the other hand, there's no guarantee that he'll survive. The most important thing right now is to discover the type of toxin so that they can find the antidote. Technically, their best bet would be using the divine power of the high priest, but he's been summoned elsewhere for the rest of the festival. The emperor is in shambles. Not only is he stressed about his son's survival, but now he has to deal with all these rumors springing up about the poisoning being a bad omen. Some people are even saying it's a sign that his heir isn't worthy. What a load of nonsense. The Empress is with the princess right now. The worst of it has passed, but they still need a high priest or someone similar to get rid of the toxins in her body, which is kind of ironic. The one person capable of healing her and Isis is Aisha herself. Speaking of our main girl, she's currently having traumatic flashbacks to her time as Alyssa, when she was trapped in a dark cell with no way out. Aisha, back in her old body, immediately starts to panic. Her throat starts to burn, and the only water nearby is filthy and out of her reach. She tries to grab it anyway and ends up spilling the entire bowl when it knocks against the bars. That feeling of emptiness and desperation takes her right back to her life as Alyssa and the injustice she felt when her whole family turned against her. It's not the kind of thing you can just forget, even after being reborn. She curls up in a ball, wishing to die. Just then, a strange voice in her head answers back. The voice says she doesn't mean it, that she still has goals to accomplish before she gives up. Aisha is a little creeped out, but I guess having voices in her head isn't any weirder than going back in time. The voice reminds her not to focus on the family who abandoned her. There's a whole other family who loves her and is waiting for her on the other side. A blinding light fills the cell, and at first, Aisha can't see a thing. Then the image sharpens. Fireworks burst over the heads of her family, calling her name and beckoning her back to the real world. That's all she needed to remember the truth. She's Aisha, not Alyssa. That life is over. She has a new purpose now, new people to live for. Unfortunately, this isn't one of those dream sequences where she can just click her fingers and wake up. Aisha starts running across an empty field, but the light just gets further and further away with every step. Frustrated, she lies down, trying to think of another strategy. What is that light, anyway? Feels warm and welcoming the way her family feels. Suddenly, Aisha sits up. She realizes that the light is not just other people. It's also inside of her. She doesn't need to chase it. She already has it. Confident once more, Aisha stands up and walks toward the light, calling out the name of her fairy spirit. As she gets closer, a darkness approaches her from behind, but Aisha isn't scared. She just steps into the light, knowing it will take her back home to the place where she belongs. Damn, I know she's lived twice already, but she sure is smart for a 7-year-old. Having successfully returned to her body, Aisha opens her eyes to find a teary Empress Iris by her bedside. She cries out and pulls her daughter into a tight hug as Aisha assures her she's perfectly fine. Excuse me, girl, you nearly died. The priest confirms it too when checking up on her. Although she's regained her energy, she still needs a lot more rest and treatment to recover from the poisoning. Aisha asks at once about her brother. Seeing her mother's worried face, she knows immediately that something's not right. The priest reluctantly explains that Isis is in critical condition. Since he consumed so much poison, they've already contacted the high priest, but since he's away on a pilgrimage, he won't arrive until tomorrow afternoon at the earliest. Aisha tries to get out of bed, gritting her teeth from the pain. Her mother and the priest try to make her rest, but she won't hear a word of it now while Isis is in danger. She snatches some medicine from the priest's hands and drinks it all in one go, demanding to visit her brother. Bion and the emperor are watching over Isis when the princess arrives in her mother's arms. The emperor looks very concerned to see her out of bed, but she doesn't bother speaking to him. She rushes straight to Isis, who is lying in bed, clearly fighting a fever. A priest is doing his best to keep the toxins at bay, but it's obvious Isis is struggling. I have no idea how a 7-year-old, even a crazy talented one with magic and fairies on her side, is going to save a dying boy, but Aisha is determined to do it. Isis always protected her, so now it's her turn. Atiri Lu appears, grateful to see Aisha up and about. Her owner doesn't waste time with pleasantries and immediately asks if she can call an intermediate spirit to help her brother. First, Lu refuses. Aisha only just recovered, so she doesn't have much energy to spend trying to summon a higher-level spirit right now. Could be really dangerous. Then she suddenly remembers about magic stones, which can basically lend her more energy to carry out the summoning. With a magic stone, they might just be able to do it. With Lu's blessing, Aisha pulls out the stone Arisan gave her at the birthday banquet. She's been keeping it safe just in case she needed it for something like this, but unfortunately, the stone is empty of energy. Lu thinks that might be why she was able to regain her consciousness so quickly, because the magic in the stone was protecting her mana. Now it's run out, which leaves Aisha out of options. But if Aisha can do one thing, it's improvise. She suddenly asks Bion if she can borrow his magic stone, and he agrees. Her family watches in confusion as their 7-year-old suddenly gets on the ground and starts scribbling a rune from her ancient textbook. They've never seen her use magic before, especially not to summon a spirit. They must think she's lost her marbles. The rune she draws this time is huge, far bigger than the one that summoned Lu. She steps back, places Bion's magic stone in the center, and begins the incantation. Her parents are shocked and kind of terrified when the rune lights up red and starts sapping energy from their daughter. This time, the summoning requires a lot more from little Aisha, who can barely hold her head up from the effort. But once it's complete, a large, life-size fairy appears in the center and introduces themselves as Remy. Aisha extends a hand, asking to sign a contract. The spirit accepts, not like they have a choice, and kisses her hand to seal the deal. The red haze disappears after that. Just like Lu, Remy now has a physical form, though she seems a little more serious than her first fairy friend. At this point, the Emperor and Empress are practically begging for an explanation, like what just happened. When did their daughter get these powers? And why is there a fairy in their son's bedroom? Speaking of Isis, the poor kid's life is still very much in danger. Aisha explains briefly that she has summoned a spirit with healing powers to save her brother and approaches his bedside. Remy explains that she and Aisha are already connected. Since they've signed the contract, the closer the two of them are, the more of Remy's power Aisha can use. So it only makes sense for her to just slip inside her body. Well, kind of. Remy shares her energy and knowledge with her owner, turning the princess's eyes golden. Suddenly, she feels strong again and knows what to do instinctively. She places her hands over Isis and starts to heal him. Takes a lot of energy, but it seems to be working. Within only a few seconds, Isis stirs, but it's not enough. Even with Remy's added powers, she can't wake him up and break the fever. Thinking of their childhood and all the time they spent together, Aisha summons all of her energy, every last drop, and tries to keep her hands steady. After a few seconds, she collapses. Fortunately, Bion is there to catch her, but the writing's on the wall. She doesn't have enough energy or power to completely heal her brother, at least not without wrecking herself in the process. Exhausted and defeated, Aisha cries out her frustration. She doesn't know it, but the truth is she's already done enough. Isis has woken up, thinking he's in heaven. His weepy sister throws herself at him, too relieved to even speak. I can't believe it. She actually saved him. I don't know about you guys, but for a second there, I really thought we were about to lose him. I'm sure you guys already know what happens next. Everybody cries and hugs each other. Isis slowly regains his strength, and Aisha finally reveals the truth about her ability to summon spirits. The useless priest who's still hanging around, by the way, apologizes for not being able to save Isis on his own. He's so impressed by Aisha that he even calls her a saint, which, I mean, let's be honest, it's not off the table. Aisha, of course, denies it. She's just a spirit mage, a very talented one, but a mage nonetheless. To prove it, she summons Lu to appear in front of them and introduces herself. Her father boasts about how proud he is and promises to support her future path as a mage. Well, I guess that solved the question of her career. The priest is still in shock, so Aisha explains the truth about Luminous, a god who is also the king of the light spirits. That's where the priests get their power from, which is why it seemed like Aisha's powers are so holy. It's kind of a risk to be explaining all of this, since revealing that a god is actually just a spirit probably won't go down well with the church. But this priest seems pretty chill. He's mainly just impressed that a little girl could summon more power than the high priest. He names her a goddess, which Aisha kind of just ignores. They can call her whatever they want, but Aisha makes it clear that she has no intention of joining their religion. Her place is with her family in the imperial palace. After that's settled, Bion excuses himself, promising to keep what happened here a secret for now. The Emperor and Isis have a spine-chilling conversation about how they're going to punish the attempted murderers, all while smiling like psychopaths. I guess there's a reason the Emperor has been such a good ruler all this time. Over the next few weeks, everyone in the palace makes a big fuss about Aisha. The Empress will only allow her to eat in bed, which means Aisha's maid is basically hand-feeding her every spoonful. She's also being forced to take some horrible bitter medicine that the high priest brought after returning from his travels. The culprit of the poisoning was discovered to be a famous count from the north who didn't support Isis as a successor. The emperor was merciless in his revenge, but Aisha still isn't sure they've uncovered the whole story. After all, why would the count target Aisha as well? It seems more like they're trying to the Elmer royalty. Plus, the fact that they used exactly the same poison that Marian ingested, well, it's all a bit suspicious if you ask me. A little while later, Aisha is finally allowed outside her bedroom to enjoy the refreshing summer weather. While taking a stroll in the gardens, she meets Isis, who confirms her suspicions. The Count is not their real enemy, and while Isis wants her to know the whole truth, their father is strictly against it. Isis also says that she has the right not to listen. She's still just a kid, and he's determined to become stronger so that if she wants to live in ignorance, he can continue protecting her. But let's be honest, we all know Aisha isn't that kind of girl. The princess reminds him that she saved him last time. She's more than capable of handling herself, so it's only fair they treat her like an adult and tell her the whole story. Isis knew she'd say that. He tells her the Count never let anything slip despite painful interrogation. But the successor excuse wasn't enough to fool the Emperor. After further investigation, they discovered that the true culprits were the imperial family of the Eden Bell Empire. I can't say I'm surprised. As far as they know, the Eden Bell Empire family are a big old mess. Plus, the crown prince currently on the throne is known to have many faults. The eldest princess, Alyssa, has been deposed for trying and failing to assassinate another member of the imperial family, which is such a shock that Aisha almost collapses. She looks very pale, but she insists that Isis tell her the rest. They don't know the whole story yet, but they suspect that the crown prince instigated their poisoning in an attempt to draw attention away from his own family and weaken their main rivals, the Elmer Empire. After hearing all of that, Aisha feels sick. Finding out that the family who killed her in her past life are after her again, well, you can understand why she's so upset. Worried about her condition, Isis tries to send his sister back to the palace to rest, but she has something important to tell him first. When she looks up, Aisha is crying. She confesses that she was born with memories of another life before her time as a princess of Elmer. She tells him everything, her old identity, the false accusation, and even her eventual execution. Most importantly, she swears that she had nothing to do with the poisoning. She must be scared that Isis won't believe her. Although I don't know why she's worried. She could tell him she's secretly a flying pig, and I'm pretty sure that boy would believe her. Of course, Isis doesn't even hesitate. Even though it's a crazy story, he immediately says he believes her. I'm not sure if he's super loyal or just super stupid, but he seems to have no trouble with the whole reincarnation thing either. But at the very least, he knows her well enough to know Aisha could never kill someone. Not in this life or the past either. Even if the whole world turned against her, Isis promises to always stand by her side. Oh, you guys, isn't he just perfect? After that, Aisha sobs her little heart out in his arms. The tears just won't stop, even after she's feeling better and Isis has promised 1,000 times to treat her enemies as his own. And you just know he's serious. This boy would do unspeakable things to anyone who tried to harm his baby sister. So he asks her what she wants to do. Does she want to go after the Eden Bells? Does she want to forget about it and move on? Obviously not. She wants revenge. That's why she was reborn, after all. And more than anything, she wants to clear her name. Alyssa's name, that is. Isis promises to help her, and after that, she lays on his lap, looking up at the clouds. After all these years, she's finally come clean about both her powers and her past life. It feels good to be honest and to have her favorite person accept her despite everything. Aisha admits that she's really scared all this love and happiness will suddenly disappear. But with Isis watching over her, she can rest a little easier. She falls asleep on his lap, where even in her dreams, he keeps her safe. Meanwhile, over in the Edenal Empire, Crown Prince Loyas is feeling bitter that his assassination attempt failed. Not only did he fail, but now they've also lost their inside man, the Count who took the blame. He knows that if the truth comes out, it won't be possible to prevent an all-out war, which would be fine by him if he only had time to weaken the Elmer Empire first, strengthen his own forces, and quickly gain the title of emperor. That's what he was trying to do by poisoning Isis and Aisha, but obviously that didn't work. So now he needs to prepare in case this whole situation escalates to a conflict. The prince is pulled from his thoughts when he spots his sister Marion looking just as gorgeous and innocent as ever. Isn't it freaky how different people can be on the inside? She's even sitting by herself, quietly praying like a little angel. Gee, this girl gives me the creeps. Loyas knew she'd be here. Apparently, she comes to the temple of Selena fairly often, and he wanted to speak to her. As he sits down, he gets a sudden flashback of his younger years when the siblings all went for a picnic together, Alyssa included. Just seeing her face makes his head hurt. Yeah, it should. That's called guilt pain, buddy. He breaks the news that the poisoning failed, which seems to disappoint the so-called Saint Marian. He assumes the Elmer family just have a really good priest. He has no idea that his dead sister was reincarnated as the princess and managed to save his rival's life. While thinking about Alyssa, he remembers the political scramble during her accusation, how different people tried to avoid the blame by supporting her execution. Her mother did so, and Lois was the same as her half-brother and heir to the throne. Lots of people pointed the finger at him as well. Some people are still trying to keep those rumors alive just to ruin his reputation and his chances at becoming emperor. That's why he's so desperate to prove himself by taking out the Elmer family and conquering their empire in war if he has to. Even now, it seems little Alyssa is causing problems for her ex-family. Despite the trouble, Lois has been having strangely fond flashbacks to his time with her in the past few months. Her hands were always warm, while Marian's hand is ice cold when he grabs it. Hello, how many signs is this guy going to ignore? Back in the Elmer Empire, there's another crown prince being haunted by his past. Isis often thinks of his sickly mother who passed away when he was very little. Even though her death wasn't his fault, he always felt that way since her condition worsened after giving birth to him. For a while after his mother's death, he became very cynical. There were a lot of people hoping to depose him, just like Lois, and he was also suspicious of the emperor until his father declared publicly that he was the one and only heir to the throne. After that, his position stabilized, but he still didn't let his guard down. He was worried the next empress would give birth to a prince, and then everything would become complicated. For that reason, he avoided Empress Iris when she first joined the palace. Despite the distance, she always made an effort to treat him kindly, to be honest and welcoming to her new son. He tried to ignore her. Even though he was just a boy, he was wary of letting anyone too close and becoming attached to someone who might stab him in the back. What a hard life it must be as a crown prince. Things finally changed after Isis overheard the empress and his father discussing their next child with the palace staff. His worst fear was coming true. If the empress had a baby boy, his position would be in jeopardy. A moody little Isis stomped off, deciding not to take walks through the palace again in the future. The empress knew that he had been listening to the conversation. So, in the beautiful and peaceful garden, he walked silently, thinking that this would be his last day on this path. But suddenly, a familiar voice called his name.
Suddenly, someone called his name. Prince Isis. He froze. Isis turned his head and softly exclaimed, "You?" Isis said quietly, "You are Queen Iris." He asked, confused, "Why have you come here?" Then he hesitated again. Isis chose to turn abruptly and said coldly, "Your Majesty is here, so I shall take my leave." The queen let out an ah, calling, "Prince Isis." Isis reminded himself not to turn back when he heard the call. Thump, thump, thump. The sound grew louder with each step of the two people. Prince Isis accidentally tripped on a stone while running and thinking at the same time, "If I turn back." Oh. Isis's eyes widened as he staggered. Russell. Queen Iris, seeing the scene before her, was terrified and covered her mouth. Isis fell and rolled down the gentle slope. The queen cried out loudly, "Prince Isis." Isis stirred, in too much pain to speak, thinking to himself, how far have I rolled? He sat up, feeling dizzy. A voice full of worry rang directly in Isis's ears, making him cover his ears. "Prince Isis." The queen panicked, hurriedly running over with quick steps. She repeatedly called out to Isis, "Prince Isis." Startled, Isis shouted, "Dangerous." He thought, if she keeps running down like that. Whoosh. Queen Iris had already reached Isis. Using both hands to hold his face, she looked intently at him. She shook Isis's face, asking with concern, "Are you all right?" The action made Isis's vision blur. Looking down at his knees, she saw they were full of scratches. The queen said, heartbroken, "Ah, how did you get injured so badly?" "Ah." Tears welled up in her eyes. Isis withdrew his hand, continuing to show a cold attitude, saying, "I'm fine. Don't worry about me." Queen Iris said indignantly, "How can that be? You're bleeding like this." Isis frowned like a little old man and said, "Compared to the wound, I'm more concerned about my clothes. The queen called softly, Prince Isis. Isis impatiently pretended to close his eyes and said, It's just a scraped knee. Why are you making such a fuss? This is nothing at all. Whether I'm injured or not, just leave me alone, Your Majesty. Your concern only makes me feel burdened. He continued, Moreover, you're pregnant. Why are you running like that? Why are you doing such dangerous things? After saying this, even Isis felt it was a bit too much. He thought to himself, is she angry? I deliberately said hurtful things. Of course, she must be angry. Queen Iris remained silent at Isis's words, seeming to be deep in thought about something. Isis tensed up, using his hand to grip tightly the grass growing beneath him. Secretly feeling clever, he thought, that's right. Why didn't I think of this before? Russell. He stood up on his own, pondering. Instead of pushing away and ignoring, I'll hurt her, and then just leave. He said, I'll take my leave now. Isis prepared to walk away, not forgetting to add a few words. I hope, Your Majesty, the Queen won't concern yourself with me, but instead, do what you need to do. He thought this should do it. Isis staggered away as the Queen called out, Prince Isis, Lord Isis. Isis gritted his teeth, thinking, she must be tired of my cold demeanor by now. Right? Now, the continued sending of letters to me, the bothering of me, and even smiling at me will come to an end. At this moment, in Isis's mind, the image of the Queen smiling at him was still present. Little Isis squeezed his eyes shut. Suddenly, the Queen shouted loudly, Isis. Her voice, sharp and filled with urgency, echoed through the open air, startling Isis. Whoosh! Isis, caught off guard, let out a small, oh, as his whole body was effortlessly lifted up by Queen Iris. His feet left the ground in an instant, and he froze, unable to process what was happening. Before Isis could react, the Queen's commanding voice rang out again. Don't move, lie still, she said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. Plop. Isis found himself placed gently, but swiftly on a nearby rock. His confusion only deepened as he watched the Queen kneel beside him, her movements precise and purposeful. She examined the wound on his knee with sharp eyes, her brows furrowed with concern. Without hesitation, Queen Iris leaned forward and used her teeth to tear the sleeve of her elegant dress. The fabric, now frayed and uneven, was quickly transformed into a makeshift bandage. Isis watched, wide-eyed and speechless, as the Queen worked with surprising efficiency. Even as she carefully wrapped the torn fabric around his injured knee, Isis remained motionless, his mind spinning. He sat there, dazed and overwhelmed, thinking, she picked me up, strength lifting me up. The thoughts swirled in his head, growing louder with every passing second, until they were abruptly interrupted. Lord Isis, the Queen said, her voice softer now, but with a hint of reprimand. Why don't you value your own body? Isis flinched at her words. He looked up at her, startled, as her piercing gaze bore into him. Queen Iris's face, usually calm and composed, was darkened with displeasure. She continued, her tone growing more intense. Seeing the blood on your knee made me very angry. Isis felt something stir inside him, a strange, unfamiliar warmth. Is she showing distress because of me? He wondered, almost in disbelief. Really because of me? The Queen, seemingly unaware of his inner turmoil, focused on tying a firm knot on the bandage she had created. As she worked, her voice softened again, tinged with emotion. You, Lord Isis, are so precious. You are someone I cherish so much. How can you tell me not to pay attention, not to care about you? Her words struck him like a bolt of lightning, leaving him speechless. Queen Iris looked at him then, her gaze gentle yet unwavering. Is it because I'm not your birth mother? She asked, her voice trembling ever so slightly. Isis's body stiffened. He pressed his lips together tightly, struggling to find the right response. Then, after a long pause, he shook his head, a small, almost imperceptible movement. Despite his silence, The queen's smile remained unchanged, as though she already knew the answer. Her eyes glimmered with a warmth that reached deep into his heart. She spoke again, her tone wistful. "Li, after that day, I couldn't hear news from that person for a long time." In the grand palace hallway, the sound of footsteps echoed against the marble floors as Isis walked alongside a knight. His thoughts were heavy, weighed down by a mix of emotions and uncertainty. Soon enough, the crown prince ascension ceremony will be held, he thought to himself, his gaze fixed on the ground ahead. Such a quick crown prince ceremony. He must be planning to secure his position before Queen Iris gives birth, right? The thought left a bitter taste in his mouth. Grandfather must be very happy about this. But is that all there is to it? His steps slowed as he approached a large window. The sunlight streaming through cast long shadows on the floor, and he found himself staring out at the vast gardens below. The Crown Prince Ascension ceremony is just because Grandfather always likes it that way. What meaning does it have? Will I forever be Grandfather's puppet? A deep sigh escaped his lips as he leaned against the window frame, his shoulders slumping slightly. "It's suffocating," he admitted silently. "I have no reason left to stay here. But I also have nowhere else to go." His gaze dropped to the light blue handkerchief in his hand. The soft fabric felt cool against his fingers, and his mind drifted back to an earlier moment. The queen's voice echoed in his memory. "I was so flustered earlier that I completely forgot to bring a handkerchief." He could still picture her gentle smile as she used the handkerchief to wipe his face. Her words resonated deeply within him. "Promise me that there won't be a second time you downplay your own pain," she had said, her tone a mix of kindness and firmness. "Please, I beg you, don't be indifferent to yourself. If it hurts, you can say it hurts." Prince Isis. The familiar voice snapped him out of his reverie. Isis startled, quickly stepping to the side to compose himself. He turned to see Queen Iris approaching, her smile radiant despite the noticeable weight of her heavily pregnant belly. "Queen Iris," he greeted softly, bowing his head. "It's been a while since we last met, Prince," she said cheerfully. Her eyes sparkled with warmth, and she covered her mouth to stifle a light laugh. Now I should call you Crown Prince, shouldn't I?" Her words caught him off guard, and he felt a pang of awkwardness. "Thank you, Your Majesty," he replied, his tone formal but slightly uneasy. The queen tilted her head and asked, "Prince Isis, are you busy right now?" Her question surprised him, and he hesitated for a moment before replying, and no. Queen Iris's smile widened. "If possible, could you come to my palace for tea?" Inside the queen's private palace, the atmosphere was warm and inviting. The room was filled with items that hinted at the arrival of a child, small bear cribs, soft fabrics, and a collection of children's books. Isis glanced around, his curiosity piqued. He couldn't help but take in the details, his gaze lingering on the shelves lined with books and the carefully arranged toys. Seeing his interest, Queen Iris chuckled softly. She gestured for him to sit and called, "Prince Isis." At her voice, he turned his attention back to her. She smiled gently and said, "Actually, I have something I want to ask of you." The words made him freeze. His expression darkened slightly as a warning from his grandfather resurfaced in his mind. You should be wary of Queen Iris. The human heart is unpredictable. He gulped nervously, his heart pounding. Is her true nature finally showing? Indeed, grandfather's words were right. Now that the crown prince position has been decided, what thing could she want from me? The clinking sound of tea preparation filled the silence as the queen busied herself. Finally, she spoke again. "The favor I want to ask of you, Prince Isis, is..." She paused, her smile softening. "If the baby is born safely, I hope you'll be a good older brother to the baby." Her words stunned Isis. His heart skipped a beat as he blushed, the unexpected request leaving him momentarily speechless. "An older brother?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Queen Iris nodded. Her hand rested gently on her belly as she said, "Yes. I've heard it might be a baby girl. If she's born, it would be wonderful if she could get along with Brother Isis." Her voice softened further as she added, If that happens, then Prince Isis won't feel lonely anymore. Isis's chest tightened at her words. He pursed his lips, deep in thought. For the first time, someone is asking me to take on a different role, not as crown prince or prince. The queen, noticing his silence and embarrassment, raised her hand to her face and asked, "Is what I'm asking too difficult?" Isis remained silent, his gaze fixed downward. A moment of quiet passed between them before he finally answered, "No, I will think about it." The queen, somewhat surprised by his response, couldn't help but laugh happily. "All right," she said, her voice light and cheerful. With that, Isis turned and ran down the corridor, his steps quick and purposeful. His expression, however, betrayed his excitement. As he moved through the palace halls, he thought to himself, "Since then, I've been frequently visiting the Queen's palace, Your Majesty. There's nowhere else to go." The irony of that thought struck him, as if mocking his earlier feelings. When he reached the Queen's room, he opened the door and stepped inside. He smiled softly, thinking, the Queen's palace is truly so warm. Walking toward the Queen, Isis felt a sense of fulfillment. For the first time, I've been given the role of an older brother, and I'm very satisfied with it. As he looked at Queen Iris's belly, she noticed his gaze and asked, "Would you like to listen to the sounds?" Isis nodded eagerly, his curiosity piqued. Everything is so unfamiliar, he thought. The rhythmic sound of life filled the room. Thump, thump, thump. Isis squinted slightly as he focused on the sound. A small, joyful smile crossed his face as he listened intently. Not long after that moment, his father made a significant announcement. The crown prince's investiture ceremony was to be held. Banquets and celebrations were organized and lasted for an entire month. There was a knock at the door. Knock, knock. The door opened slowly, and Isis's grandfather appeared, stepping into the room with a calm demeanor. "Your Highness, Crown Prince," he greeted warmly. Isis, upon seeing him, immediately jumped up and ran over. "Grandfather," he exclaimed. His grandfather observed him with pride and said, "You're already wearing the ceremonial robes prepared for the ceremony, aren't you? They really suit you." "Thank you, grandfather." Isis replied politely, a faint sense of accomplishment in his voice. His mood seems good today, Isis thought, carefully observing him. The old man let out a hearty laugh. "Haha. From now on, you'll be called His Highness, Crown Prince Isis." Isis felt a small wave of happiness at hearing this. That must be it. His lifelong wish has come true. His grandfather continued to marvel at the moment. "It sounds so good," he added, his voice filled with admiration. Isis pressed his lips together briefly before speaking up. "Grandfather, I have something I want to tell you," he said, his tone more serious now. His grandfather's kind eyes met his. "Yes, Your Highness Crown Prince? What is it?" Although hesitant at first, Isis gathered his courage and said, "Although you may find this abrupt, I have never once wanted to become the Crown Prince." His grandfather's expression changed slightly as he processed the words. "Never?" he asked, his voice low with surprise. Isis nodded and explained further. "Even if I've wanted to continue living, I've never thought about wanting to become the Crown Prince, not even once. But grandfather has always forced me to take on that role." Lowering his head, he added, "It makes me terribly tired." Isis clenched his fists as he stood there, thinking, how much will grandfather understand me? I don't know anymore. Tears threatened to spill, but he held them back. He recalled a memory from the past, being cared for by Queen Iris in the forest. The image strengthened his resolve. "But I want to say it out loud, that I wasn't born to become a tool to be exploited. So even if grandfather can't understand me." Closing his eyes tightly, Isis took a deep breath and waited. Suddenly, a quiet "I'm sorry" broke the silence. His eyes snapped open, surprised by the words. With a small rustle, his grandfather sat down before him and said, Actually, I knew that too, that His Highness Isis doesn't care for the Crown Prince's seat." Isis hesitated, unsure of what to say. Then why?" he asked, his voice tinged with confusion. His grandfather bowed his head before him. Perhaps His Highness, the Crown Prince Isis, might see this as an excuse, but I was also very anxious. The older man continued, revealing more of his thoughts. That child, Fuss, left early, and the only thing that child left behind was your highness, the prince. Reaching out, he grasped Isis's arm gently. So, I told myself I would do my best just to protect your highness, but it seems that has become this old man's ambition. Looking into his grandson's eyes, he said, His Highness Isis's eyes are exactly like Fuss's eyes. He paused before continuing. Every time I see those eyes, I tell myself I must strive to ensure His Highness doesn't leave me like Fuss did. Isis closed his eyes briefly, lost in thought. Mother. He pictured his mother, her gentle smile, even when lying sick in bed. The memory brought a sense of calm. Looking back at his grandfather, Isis said, But grandfather, you've made a mistake. You said that person was always the enemy, right? But Iris, she's clearly a good person. As soon as he said this, Isis realized something. For the first time, I didn't call her Her Majesty the Queen. His grandfather's expression softened with understanding. He bowed his head and said, You're right. With a thoughtful tone, he added, That person is in the palace, probably still preparing for the ceremony. Do you want to go see her? Isis's face lit up. Yes, he replied with enthusiasm. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed as Isis ran toward the queen's palace. Click-clack. The door opened, and a familiar voice spoke from behind him. Isis, are you here to see the queen? Turning around, Isis greeted his father. The emperor, his golden hair gleaming like sunlight and his blue eyes calm as the sea, looked at his son with gentle approval. Your expression looks good indeed, the emperor remarked, startling Isis. Bashfully, Isis lowered his face and looked away. The emperor smiled, watching him quietly. After Fuss, your mother passed away. Due to the chaotic situation in the country, I couldn't take good care of you. I'm sorry, he said. Hearing these words, Isis looked up at his father. Continuing, the emperor said, Marrying Iris was also for the sake of this country, but it was also a choice made for you. Isis was surprised. Breathing heavily, he thought to himself, clearly, she's a very good person. He ran into the queen's room. However, running so fast left him short of breath, so he used his hand to wipe the sweat from his chin. The queen noticed his presence, turned her head and called to him, Crown Prince Isis, what brings you here? Isis, still catching his breath, held out a handkerchief and said, This. Queen Iris raised an eyebrow in surprise. You came to return this? She asked. Isis, flustered by her reaction, blushed faintly. The queen, noticing his awkwardness, smiled gently before turning her head back toward the window. It's good you came, she said. Last night, I had a dream. A dream? Isis asked, curious about what she might say next. The queen nodded slightly, keeping her gaze fixed on the scenery outside. Yes. In my dream, a white bird was flying freely across the blue sky, and above it, a beautiful rainbow stretched out endlessly. Snow-white doves were flying around, and the entire scene was so peaceful and serene. Isis stood in silence, listening intently. The vivid description of the dream made him visualize it as if it were unfolding before his eyes. The queen sighed softly. It was truly a beautiful dream, she continued. I told His Majesty, the Emperor, that I would like to name this child with a name meaning white bird. Isis looked at her with wide eyes, his expression reflecting his surprise and admiration. The queen turned to him and added, I also hope the relationship between this child and your highness will be very good. As she finished speaking, she noticed Isis's reaction. Tears had started to well up in his eyes, glistening like beads about to fall. She leaned closer, concerned, and asked, Lord Isis, why are you crying? Without hesitation, Isis spoke, his voice trembling. A good brother or crown prince. Whatever works. Silent tears began streaming down his face as he continued, but outside, the sky was so deep blue, The wind was blowing beautifully. His voice trailed off as he struggled to articulate his feelings. The queen observed him silently for a moment before softly replying, "Yes." Her gentle words seemed to reassure him. Her own face grew damp with tears, though she maintained a calm demeanor. She smiled faintly, repeating her response, "Yes, that's fine." Reaching out her arms, she embraced him warmly and said, "I will be a good mother to both you and Asia. I will love you both with all my heart." Isis allowed himself to be held in her embrace. Silent tears of relief and happiness continued to fall from his face. He felt a sense of comfort he had rarely experienced. The ceremony that day, it was truly beautiful, he thought. "The whole world loves you, Your Holiness." He smiled faintly, his mind filled with resolve. Holding his little sister's hand, he silently promised himself, "I will protect you." Back in the present, the soft sound of fabric being pulled broke the stillness of the morning. The nanny had drawn the sleeping curtain and gently said, "It's morning, my lady. Please wake up." Just a little more," Aisha mumbled lazily, her voice muffled by the blanket. The nanny sighed lightly, accustomed to this routine. She leaned in and lovingly kissed Aisha's hair. "Happy 14th birthday, princess," she said with a warm smile. Aisha smiled sleepily and thought to herself, "That's right. I'm 14 now." She let her thoughts wander. Since when did my height grow enough to reach an adult's shoulders? She sat still while her servant carefully brushed her long, silver hair, which now fell gracefully to her waist. After finishing, she stood up and said goodbye to the servants. "I'm going now." They saw her off at the door, bowing respectfully. "Take care, my lady," they said. Walking confidently down the hall, her small shoes made soft, rhythmic tapping sounds against the floor. Her thoughts shifted again. And what makes me happiest of all is the thought of becoming an adult. In this empire, 18 is considered the age of adulthood. That means only 4 years are left. Lost in her calculations, she suddenly found herself standing before the room she had been heading toward. She opened the door and greeted, "Good morning, Father, Mother." Queen Iris and the Emperor both smiled warmly at her and said in unison, "Happy birthday, Aisha. Happy birthday, dear." Despite the cheerful greeting, they noticed her tired expression. Concerned, they asked, "Why do you still look as tired as usual?" Memories of earlier events came rushing back. She suddenly recalled the mountain of gifts in her room. Flustered, she exclaimed, "What are all these things?" One of her servants, worried about her reaction, said hesitantly, "Princess, Your Highness." Back in the present, she let out a tired laugh and said, "Ha ha ha, do I look that way, Father and Mother?" She sat down with a curious expression and asked, "What exactly were those gifts?" "I was really surprised." The Emperor explained, "They're gifts from people in other countries sent to you. If you don't like them, you can put them in storage." Queen Iris added kindly, "Aisha, I'm very happy today because it means you are loved by many people you know." Looking at the noble woman before her, Aisha felt a warm emotion rise within her. She thought to herself, "Mother truly looks happy." She smiled back at her mother, reflecting her own joy. "Since I was little, she has been very worried about my position. But now..." Her thoughts shifted back to the time when, at just 7 years old, she had manifested the power of the spirit to save her brother. Afterward, she had gone to the temple, undergone the sacred ceremony, and received the title of Holy Maiden. The memory of the nobles, dressed in their finest garments and joyfully offering blessings, remained vivid in her mind. For decades, holy maidens born in the divine palace had been loved by everyone. The streets were alive with celebration, and newspapers sold rapidly. The fact that she was also the only princess of the empire attracted even more attention from the people. Aisha frowned slightly, though her cheeks flushed with mild embarrassment. The increase in the empire status is a good thing, but those gifts, it's a bit overwhelming. Her thoughts were interrupted when a voice called out, "Well, next, it's time to receive the gifts we've prepared." The Emperor took out a small scroll and asked with a teasing smile, "You didn't think we'd forget, did you?" Aisha's eyes focused on the scroll in his hands as he slowly unrolled it. She began to guess, her thoughts racing. Is it a map? The Emperor's smile deepened as he revealed more of the scroll. Aisha, slightly surprised but unsure, asked, "Could it be that my birthday gift is a map?" A sudden silence followed. The air seemed heavier as realization dawned on her. Her face turned pale, and she began to understand the situation. She muttered internally, "No, it can't be." The Emperor nodded and confirmed, "That's right." He pointed at a small area marked with mining symbols on the map and declared in a calm but confident tone, "This entire island is yours." Aisha stared in disbelief, screaming internally, "I knew it would be like this." Doubts began to cloud her mind. Is this island really mine? But wait, doesn't this island belong to the Riot and Duchy? As if reading her thoughts, the Emperor responded, "That's correct. This is the Diamond Island of the Riot and Duchy." But, he added with a knowing look, that was only the case a few days ago. Aisha's expression remained one of shock as she tried to process this. Still struggling to believe what she was hearing, she gaped and asked in a hesitant voice, "The diamond ore on this island, it's all from gold or veins. How is that even possible?" The Emperor, patient and composed, explained, "For that, you should thank Isis. Thanks to him working closely with me as a diplomatic ambassador." Before he could finish his sentence, the sound of hurried knocking echoed through the room, followed by the creak of the door opening. A familiar voice came from the doorway. "I apologize for being late. The morning training session went on a bit longer than expected," the person said. Crown Prince Isis stepped into the room with a bright and radiant smile. "Good morning, father, mother, and Aisha, too," he greeted cheerfully. He approached with a sheepish expression and explained, "I meant to arrive early, but I ended up being late." The Queen, always warm and welcoming, smiled at him and said, "Isis, you're here." He responded with a respectful tone, "Yes, mother." Aisha observed him with fondness. She couldn't help but recall how, after his coming-of-age ceremony, he had officially started addressing the Queen as mother. It had been a significant moment for all of them. Turning his attention to Aisha, Isis wore the brightest smile possible and asked, "Happy birthday. Did you like your birthday gift?" Aisha felt overwhelmed by his radiant presence. She thought to herself, his beauty is truly unfair, it's sinful. Isis seemed to be glowing, as if the light followed him wherever he went. The Crown Prince's characteristic seriousness, strength, and charm were apparent even in such a relaxed atmosphere. His outstanding literary and martial skills, paired with his flawless appearance, made him seem like a prince who had stepped straight out of a storybook. It was no wonder that he was the most sought-after bachelor in the Empire, receiving countless marriage proposals. Isis looked at Aisha with genuine affection, and she happily replied, "Yes, thank you, brother." She thought to herself with a smile, of course, for someone as perfect as him, rejecting marriage proposals is nothing. Now that he's not engaged, he has even more time to spend with me. Curiosity got the better of her, and she asked, "But how did you manage to get the island from the Riot and Duchy like that?" Isis replied confidently, "Of course, it's possible." The Queen, who had been quietly sipping her tea, suddenly set her teacup down. She looked around the room with a calm but commanding presence and interrupted the lively atmosphere. "Wait a moment," she said, clearing her throat to get their attention. "Everyone, it's good to be proud of your own gifts, but none of you have heard about Mother's gift yet, have you?" She leaned forward slightly and lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. "Mother's gift," she announced, "is a vacation trip." Aisha's expression lit up with excitement. "A vacation?" she repeated, her voice full of anticipation. The Queen nodded and explained, "That's right. I've prepared a villa in the south of the Empire. It's a place with a warm climate and incredibly beautiful scenery." Her voice carried a cheerful tone as she added, "Isn't it exciting? If you like it." Before she could finish, Aisha threw her arms around her mother in a warm embrace. "I do like it," she exclaimed happily. She nuzzled against her mother and repeated, "I like it. I like it very much. A vacation. Mother, you're the best." The emperor and crown prince watched the scene with affectionate smiles. Isis, unable to resist teasing, said playfully, "What about me? Say that my gift is the best too." The emperor, joining in the light-hearted banter, suggested with a smirk, "I didn't expect you to like traveling so much. Next time, to make traveling even more comfortable, I'll give you a country named after you. How about that?"